Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Freddy J Show. I'm excited to have another show. It's been a long time coming to record again. And as you can see, if you were watching this on video, then I'm in a professional studio. So I got to the point where I was like, I'd be much better off to rent and have all the professional equipment, have good sound, have good video, and be able to be more professional with the podcast. From the very beginning, I've always wanted to just keep it going, and build something great that other people can learn and can listen in. And thank you to you guys that listen to every podcast. I think we have a lot of fans, and it's crazy because we haven't put a podcast up in almost a year, and we still get a bunch of downloads every week, and I get a report on it from an email, how many downloads we have, and it's been cool. So thank you guys that still tune in and listen to the podcast, even the older episodes that we've done. And I'm excited to share today. I kind of wanted to just do an introduction podcast back and share kind of what the last year has looked like for us. The initial reason why I did just kind of push pause on everything, halt on everything, is because of my construction company. We kind of went through some rocky roads for several months there, and it was just time that I focused everything back in on that and get down, get my hands dirty, get back on the job, get in and get back in the rut of everything and try to turn everything around, which has, thank God, has gone quite well over the last year. So I'm excited to get into some of that stuff today and share some of that with you and share some of the lessons that we've learned and kind of what got us into the hot seat. And also kind of wanted to, for any of the new listeners, then give a little bit of backstory of myself. Today I'm obviously, as you can see, just solo here. But I'm hoping to have some more guests on in 2026. I'm hoping to get this podcast up before 2026. And then hopefully the first week of January, then we can get back into uploading podcasts every week or every other week. But I definitely want to put out more next year and make it something that is valuable for everybody that they can tune into weekly or bi-weekly. So a little bit about me. I'm from a religious group down out of southern Utah, and I grew up in there till I was in my early 20s, left that religion and have been kind of out here, I would say on my own, but have a lot of friends. I'm blessed to have that. Kind of grew up with a crazy background. And my blue collar and construction background started from a very young age. Worked for my uncle when I was in my early teens, and would do school in the morning, and then in the afternoon, then I'd go help him, and would work for the afternoon, and then Fridays and Saturdays, and started working with him when I was 15. And I've told the story a couple of times, I think, on the podcast, but when I was very young in those first years helping my uncle, then I remember on the weekends, then me and my mom and my brothers and sisters would go out and split wood. We worked up on the mountain where a lot of people ran fire stoves, and we would go split their wood on the weekends to help pay for our rent on our place that we were staying at my uncle's, and we'd go work our tails off. My mom with her 5 kids, and I remember when we were out there one day, just kind of coming to the realization that, like, my mom's out here, and I know I was real young, but it's kind of when I realized the weight of that, like, somebody needs to take care of my mom and be serious about taking care of her. And at the time, then my uncle was taking care of us well. It was great. But I really felt like that I was responsible for her now. Didn't have a dad, didn't have really a dad figure whatsoever at that time in my life. And so I felt like I should take some responsibility. One day we were splitting wood, and we were using my uncle's splitter. And I remember thinking, I just want to buy a little rice burner truck and a wood splitter and come split wood. And I could make pretty good money on the weekends, and I could just go do this. You know, I could even do it by myself. And at that young age, I remember thinking, and I'm still young, but I was real young there then. But at that young age, I remember just thinking how cool it would be to own my own company. Like, I always had that ambition to do something like that. And my first real entrepreneurial venture was that I was trying to find, my uncle's son he had a wood lathe, and he would sell wood lathe pins and bowls and cups and cool shit. And so I was like, you know, what's something that I could do that I could sell that would be entrepreneurial type, something that I can, you know, feel like I built something and then sold it. And so I started building these little keychains, keychain hooks to like hang up in cabins. And I would take this scrap wood logs from the furniture. We'd build like exotic furniture out of aspen. I'd take those things and slice them up into little slabs that were like 20 inches long, 18, 20 inches long. And then I would buy these little key hook screws, and I'd screw them into there, space them out nice, lacquer finish them, and I'd go sell them at the hardware store up there. And I'd sell them for anywhere between 12 and like $26 or something. And, you know, every week then I'd go in there and he'd be like, hey, I sold another one of your hooks. And I later on in business, I actually got to know the owner of that place pretty well, and got to reminisce on some of those younger days. But, you know, I remember coming in there and the feeling of like last week, you know, you sold 2 hooks and he'd hand me $40, and it just thrilled my soul that something that I built, I sold, you know. And I feel like that's where the spark kind of came on that, you know, I want to be an entrepreneur. I was a young teen, and from there I ended up working for some other companies. I still worked for my uncle and would do this on the lunch hour. So I would cut these up and sand them up. And so that I wasn't using his new sandpaper, then I would like pull the old sandpaper, all used sandpaper out of the garbages, and I would use those so that I wasn't using his stuff. And then anytime I did use any of his new stuff, then I would pay him for it. And he kept me honest. Like I asked him, you know, can I use your sanders while I'm doing this? And he was like, yeah, if you use any sandpaper, then I think it was like 20 cents per sandpaper, you know, and I would pay him. Like I'd go hand him some cash for it. And actually made this little business that I was doing at lunchtime, and then after work, then I would do it. And sometimes on Saturdays I would do it. And it was kind of that initial spark that is when I knew, when I was splitting wood and then eventually started doing these keychain hooks, is when I knew that I wanted to pursue something in entrepreneurship. I worked for a couple of different construction companies for the next like 3.5, 4 years. And then I made the leap and started my own construction company. And I've had different people ask me, you know, about when they should hire their first employee. And I always say I don't really know that, because I had an employee from day one. I hired 2 cousins and we went to work. And when I quit the company I was working for, then I had $6,400 and somewhere in there, like a little over 60 grand. I'm not 100%, but I think it was 6,400. And by the time I started my first job, I had $1,000 and $1,000 credit card. And the week before I started my first job, then I was like, look, I'm going to start with $4,500 in the bank. I'd bought some tools, the basic tools that I would possibly need to start that first job. And when it got down to the week before, then I was like, well, where are we going to stay? Like, I need somewhere to stay. And the cheapest way to stay up there, because everything was expensive with hotels and that, was to buy a camp trailer. So I found a cheaper camp trailer, bought it for $4,300, left me with very little to start with. And I'd bought in some other tools, and I distinctly remember going into Home Depot and buying a 50-foot extension cord, because the 100-footers were $100 and the 50-footers were $50, or whatever the price was. But basically it was 50%, and I only needed 50 feet to get this job done. And that 50-foot extension cord kicked around for a lot of years, but that was the start of my entrepreneurial journey. I started with basically nothing. This was money that I'd saved up from my construction job that I was working, and made the leap. And I remember when I was going to make the leap, when I put in my 2 weeks, then I had one of the owners of that company that I was working for came to me and just basically said, hey, I don't even think you realize, what it actually takes to run a company. Like, do you have any idea what it's like to have a payroll and to run a payroll? And I was like, no, but I'll figure it out. And so the great lesson there is, like, you can leap off at any point and you're going to figure it out. In the beginning year, I didn't really know how important it was to run payroll. I mean, for the first 8 months, I didn't run any payroll, and ended up paying some back taxes and getting up to legal with everything. But in the beginning, I had no idea that, like, hey, this is required that you pay payroll. You have to pay at least a minimum wage. And I remember that transition of going from paying my guys cash to paying them payroll, and thinking, this is bullshit. Like, they're getting this much pulled out of their check. Like, wow, and it kind of just was a big mind blower and opened my brain to realize some of the things that are actually important. But in the beginning stages, I didn't know any of that. From there, then eventually I obviously had to be liability insured, and that cost money. And we started running payroll. That cost money. We eventually had to get certain levels of insurance as we grew. All those things cost money. There were so many little things. My contractor's license, I didn't have my contractor's license for the first year, and was trying to do small jobs and stuff, and eventually went and sat down, and as stupid as I am, like, I only went to 7th and 8th grade. Then I finally got my contractor's license, took the test, failed it the first time, took it the second time. Well, I passed one of the tests the first time. The second test, then I failed, passed it the second time, got my contractor's license, and we were off to the races. The reason I bring that portion up, is that really entrepreneurship, and especially blue collar, because I want to talk to you guys that are just barely starting out in blue collar, or you want to make the leap into construction or some kind of service industry. You don't have to have all your ducks in a row. The important thing is that you bail off, because then you all of a sudden immediately have in your brain that this is zero option. Like, I have to make this a success. And as you grow your team, then you realize, or all of a sudden you take the weight of them on yourself too. And it's like, I can't let these guys down either. I've got to make sure that we're a success to help the rest of the people that are working for me. And then eventually over the years, like, they bought a house and they started a family, and all of this weight that eventually ends up stacking up makes you realize the importance of what you do, and it makes you more determined. And if you have the grit to do it, it's so worth it. The reward is so worth it. So those are some of the beginning stages, and maybe I'll do a podcast where I go deeper into some of those beginning stories. I mean, there was some crazy different stories that we did. I mean, we did crazy stuff that we would never even think about doing nowadays with the level of safety that we implement into our business and whatnot. But those were the beginning stages. We were doing cabin refinishes, cabin siding, and staining, decks, roofs, metal roofs, interior trim and tongue and groove, and we did a couple of framing jobs. Excuse me. We did a couple of framing jobs, and eventually we ended up back in the steel industry because I was working for a steel company before that. Eventually we ended up back into the steel industry, and we're doing subcontract work and subbing from a sub. So we were a sub-tier sub from the subcontractor. And about 4 years ago, then we finally were just left at a place where we had to get our own customers with general contractors, because before we were subbing under the subcontractors for the generals, and eventually we made it to where a lot of the work that we're now doing is for direct to the general contractor. No difference as long as you have a good relationship and there's money to be made. I don't see any difference, although it is great to have multiple relationships so that you're not dependent on one single contractor or one single company to keep you busy. We started in commercial. For the first year, we did really well. The second year, we did really well. The rug ended up getting pulled on the contractor that we're working for on some big projects that we're helping them on. They scrambled. They had to let us go because they had a bunch of jobs slide. And then is when we had to jump in and actually build some other relationships besides just that relationship that we had. So we kind of started over about 3.5 years ago. And God be praised, we've been able to establish good relationships with several other general contractors. I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty of what the last year has been like, and the year before last, so 2024, and then how 2025 has been like, and some of the lessons that we've learned, and how we are able to flip from that year to this year, and some of the things that we did. So the end of 2023, we had a couple of jobs that we were doing that we started our first massive job that was direct to the contractor up in Utah. It was kind of bigger than what we were used to on numbers. We hadn't really leaped with that big of numbers yet. And we got to learning some pretty good lessons pretty quick about the importance of job cost tracking and how to bid projects, because we hadn't really, known how to do that. I was learning all this stuff new, but we had a nice crew around us, and we started just doing projects on our own and started trying to be productive. We had one particular project that we bid, and I'll just preface it with that in 2024, we lost a shit ton of money. And we got to the place where I honestly didn't know if we were going to be able to make it through. At that time, we'd been in business for 7 years, and I genuinely did not know how we're going to get through this. What are we going to do to be able to turn this thing around? I want to talk a little bit about what got us into that place, and then talk a little bit about what we did to turn it around. So first of all, as I started getting into that place, it started by us having some massive projects all going at the same time, getting some massive checks, and I'm just going to be kind of vulnerable because it kind of sucks to say, except for I started getting big checks and started thinking, let's buy this piece of equipment, and let's buy that welder, and let's do this, and let's do that, and kind of went off. We just consistently, 4 months straight, we're invoicing over $300,000 a month, and I was just like, this is a lot of money coming in. And every one of those months, in hindsight, we were actually overbilling for all of those. And I was buying equipment, I raised everybody's wages, Things were good. It felt great. Just was spending a lot of money on, like, I was going to a lot of events, spending a lot of money on that kind of stuff, thinking that this was going to continue on. And it didn't. And we got to the place with the same size of crew where we were invoicing for about, anywhere between 280 to 350 grand a month. And overnight, in like 3 months, it went all the way down to like 115 grand. One of the months was 80 grand. And I built my overhead so big that the company could not stay operating at that much overhead. And so I came in and I was just like I'll give you a for instance. So we had an office in Cedar City, which is in southern Utah. We had an office in northern Utah. And when we started getting these big checks, I was like, I'm going to go get another office, because I was living up in northern Utah and I wanted to have a secluded office that I could go to. And so I got a second office. Just little things like that. Different payments, different rentals that we didn't need. That's when we started building a process that we now have for our rental equipment. But at the time then, we had on like 3 different jobs a piece of equipment or 2 sitting there for an extra 2 months because we weren't paying attention to whether or not that piece of equipment had got called off. Everybody thought everybody else was going to do it. And these were just things we didn't set up. We didn't know we needed to set them up. And we just were kind of going by the seat of our pants. Or I should say, I didn't know that we needed to set them up. It's my fault. Like I just was expecting this person to do that and expecting this person to do that, but didn't go set the expectations with them, So we had a crap load of overhead. And when I kind of got to that oh shit moment, then I sat down in our office and we started going through all of our expenses every month. And in 1 week, I cut $7,500 a month off of just expense that we didn't need, in just payments and, extra shit that we were paying for that we didn't need to pay for. I cut down everything. I immediately quit paying myself, and we started going into panic mode. And I started just asking questions to anybody that I knew that was in the industry, asking them, how do I turn this around? And I ended up selling a piece of equipment. Actually, we sold 2 pieces of equipment and just started selling little stuff that I didn't need. Like I went into my garage and was like, what can I sell here? What can I sell there? And every check that I would get personally, I transferred over to the business account, and we were living from week to week. Like we would have, I remember multiple times where there was like $500 left in the business checking account after we ran payroll. It was crazy, insane. And we got to the place where we were stretching out our vendors, our rental company vendors, so far that at least once every 2 months, then we'd get an email from one of them saying, hey, on Friday, we are going to lien this project because you haven't paid us for that project and you owe us this much money. And we would scramble, get enough money to pay that down to where they wouldn't lien it. We'd ask him the exact amount he needed so we didn't lien the project. We'd pay that exact amount, barely enough, and then we'd barely make payroll the next week. And we lived from paycheck to paycheck with the company for several months. It was exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And I mean, even to this day, like I get PTSD from a certain guy's email because he was the one that was reaching out to us every single week, like, hey, we need a payment this week. And we'd pay the minimum that we'd have to pay that week, and then we'd pay the minimum that we had to pay the next week. And so we got our shoulders down to the wheel and we started pushing. A couple of us, our leaders, some of our foremen, we'd work on Saturday and Sunday. We'd donate the Saturday and Sunday for free to the company and hustle our ass off. And long story short, it ended up getting better slowly, and we've been able to turn around a lot of where we found ourselves from where we found ourselves this year. So I'm going to get into some of the things. I have a couple of notes down because I wanted to share some of the things that in hindsight that I realize and that you guys can possibly do to make sure you don't end up in that same position. So the first thing I have, the first thing that we did when we got in a bad spot, because I was still expecting some big checks, but we'd kind of already started straining ourselves, I went and got a cash loan. And these are those guys that basically they loan against your accounts receivables to where they pull weekly out of your bank account. And these guys were pulling $4,300 a week for a loan that we'd pulled with them, from them. And I want to just admonish you guys against those cash loans as much as I possibly can. They will cost you so damn much money, and it isn't worth it. It's worth struggling. It's worth struggling a little bit. It's worth selling a couple of pieces of equipment. It's worth refinancing your truck over paying those guys. The interest on that money is so extreme because the risk on their side is so extreme. I would highly admonish against pulling those cash loans. That alone, we pulled a $75,000 cash loan out, and we ended up paying, I think it ended up coming out to $105,000 by the time we paid it back. It was insanity. It was crazy. And that was over 6 months. So they took a lot of money out of us. We agreed to it, and we needed the cash. We just couldn't pay the lump sum back when we thought we'd be able to pay it back because other things had come up and more people were owed, and we just used that money for that. And it ended up putting us in a really bad spot because of that. One of the other things is I want to talk about change orders and the importance of tracking your change orders and documenting your change orders early, and then following up on your change orders, not only with the on-site superintendent, but with the project managers of the general contractor. So we had a job that we did up in Ogden, Utah, where we had invoiced for a bunch of change orders. The superintendent had signed it, and we hadn't got paid for them. Change orders sometimes will drag out. I mean, we got paid for a change order a month ago that was a year and a half old that finally got approved from the owner. So sometimes change orders can drag out. Well, we had a couple of change orders for some work that we did that was actually on the concrete contractor on site. But the superintendent that was there he left in the middle of the project and a different superintendent came in. So when I brought these up, we had signatures on our T&M tickets that were approved. And when the new superintendent came in, then he basically threw everything out and said, we're starting from zero. And I talked to the PM multiple times. We basically got down to the point where I was just like, come hell or high water, you're going to pay these change orders. And they still never got paid, and they still haven't been paid to this day. And yet they were signed. So make sure that those are agreed upon by the project manager and not just the superintendent on your projects, because if the project manager changes, the chances of you getting paid from a new project manager are much higher than the chances of getting paid from a superintendent's signature on that. So if you get a superintendent's signature on a T&M ticket, make sure that you send your invoices and your T&M tickets and your photos attached to whatever it was for your change order. Send them to the project manager within that week and make sure that they're clear on it and make sure that they are good with it and that there's an email reply back that they agree to it. The other thing with the same project manager is that we had a bunch of steel that was sitting across the other side of the lot from the project that we're doing. And when we delivered it, then originally I told him, I said, if you won't let me deliver this right by the building, I'll have a change order for us to move this across the site. And he's like, okay, yeah, no problem. We'll get you taken care of. None of that was in writing. And when it got to the end of the job, we ended up having to negotiate because the problem is when they're coming into the first of the job, they have a budget that they got to meet, right? And they'll agree to a lot of shit. If you don't get writing on that at the beginning of the project and have it signed, when they get to the end of the project is when they're starting to pinch on their budget. And they're going to pull it out of wherever they can pull it out of. And conveniently, those conversations are never remembered when you get toward the end of the project. So make sure that if you've agreed to something with a project manager or a superintendent, that it's in email and everybody has agreed to it and their signatures on it, or you're not going to get paid for it. If it gets to the end of the project, because this still sat there for 3.5 months before we ended up needing it because the project got pushed off. And then when we ended up taking it over there, then it was all muddy and we had to haul it through, 2.5 foot ruts to get it over there. It got all muddy. And it ended up costing us a lot of time, a lot of hassle, and we ended up having to negotiate at the end. Well, I'm sure I probably said something, but, what if we just throw this amount at it? And so I say all that to say, document. Make sure that you have documented to the hilt. On that same project, we had an incident happen where we had decked a mezzanine, and part of the deck sat on a 3-inch ledger, and the other part of the deck sat on a CMU wall, and we asked about, because there was no attachment called on the plan for the CMU wall. There was no cap on the top of the CMU wall with plate, none of that. And we were like, there's got to be something here. Like, this seems crazy that you're going to pour concrete on this and there's no attachment on that side. And it was a wide span, so we were kind of asking questions to the engineer. They're like, oh, yeah, no, it's all good. Well, this is the project where I learned my lesson on the importance of RFIs. And if you're trying to change an attachment style, you need to RFI it. Before that, I didn't really know that you're supposed to. Well, we had just used Hilti pins, and yet it was calling for puddle welds. So at the end of the day, then what it came down to was that when they came to us, they said, well, it called out puddle welds, used Hilti pins. Although the Hilti pins do meet that, the requirement for the attachment on there, then we went and we gauged your Hilti pins and they weren't in far enough, so we're going to blame you for it. And mind you, this was a big deal because the deck caved through, it hit a man basket underneath. Thank God nobody was under there. And they had a pump truck clear full of concrete. They had, I think, 4 concrete trucks clear full of concrete because they were going to pour the entire mezz. They had to cancel everything because all the mezz was like this. And they ended up going back to the engineer. There was a lot of people involved. At the end of the day, they ended up saying that it got over-poured on the concrete, which if any of you guys are concrete guys, you know that you can't pour concrete without over-pouring because you over-pour it, then you screed it off. And the engineer said, well, we are within our engineer parameters, but you can't over-pour and you can't put your pump hose on top of any of the deck or it puts it overweight. So at the end of the day, it really was an engineer problem. But we ended up eating that. The lesson that I want to share there is, and that is what added to the money that we lost last year. And the lesson is make sure that you RFI if you're going to change attachments and make sure you document all of your conversation about bringing up any safety issues that you see, because you think that, I used to come into projects thinking that engineers just, like, all the corners were looked through and everybody had agreed on what the architectural needed to look like in all these areas. It'd blow your mind how many times the architect and the engineer cross paths. It's like seldomly, it seems, on a lot of these projects. So make sure that you document any questions or concerns that you have, that they're documented well. It isn't just about a conversation to the superintendent. It's about go through and actually have the conversation with them and say, hey, I have this concern. Can you send this email to the engineer? Get the engineer involved. Make sure that you cover all your bases so that if anything bad happens, then you did cover your base. And then make sure that if you change any attachment styles or you change, I don't know what other things there would be, maybe a design in concrete in the type of concrete you're using. If there's any of those changes, even though you know that it meets the parameters, make sure that you have an RFI for it and that the RFI was followed through and agreed on by the engineer. So I have a couple more things here. We did another project at the start of this year that was also, we finished at the start of this year. A lot of lessons learned on that project as well. At the end of the project, which actually was only a couple of months ago, where we came back and did some extra things, we always exclude the big sliding doors on airplane hangars. And I'm going to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty because I have a lesson for everybody that you can take from it. We always exclude the doors. On this one, they came back to us and said, please include the doors. We don't have anybody to erect them. We need you guys to erect the doors. And finally, I was like, all right, here's a number, what I thought was a pretty good number. And it was like he needed an immediate number. He called me on the phone and was like, hey, I need a number for this. I'm like, okay, I don't have the plans on me. And he's like, well, I need to submit it this afternoon. And I was like, we'd done a bunch of work with him. So I says, hey, what do you think it's going to take us to do it? I haven't looked at any of the plans for the door. And he's like, I think it'll be about this much. We end up getting there, and the door package is not only for all the steel. So in the original, then originally when we talked, then we talked like it was just the structural portion of the door. When we get there, we end up finding out that there's all kinds of flashing and door sills and motors that we're supposed to install and covers to the motors we're supposed to install. And originally we thought it was just the steel. So the lesson there is make sure that you look at plans before you bid a job. No matter how much pressure there is behind, hey, we need to get this number together. Make sure that you go through it, get down how long you think it's going to take, actually send an estimate, and follow through with, on the front end, with what the details of that project consist of before you just agree to something. I mean, some of you are probably looking at me and be like, dude, you're pretty stupid for being in business for this long. But hey, it was a small thing. I thought it was going to be 3 days. It ended up being 3 weeks. That's straight up how the difference was. So, and I learned another lesson. And maybe you guys can learn from it so you don't end up in the bad spot that I ended up in. That's kind of what I wanted to share today. I will just say that when it feels like that you are at the wit's end of everything that you could possibly handle, you've gone through hell, the ruts of losing a lot of money, and you're losing money every single month because your projects are going month to month. You don't know how you're going to get out on the other side. The tunnel looks like that it's just dark, and it's been dark for miles. The biggest thing is never quit. Never give up. Always just get up the next day and decide what is there today that I can do that's going to get me through the day and have a positive impact on where we're trying to go. That's the only thing that you can do. You can fret and worry about it, which I did a lot of. I let it affect me a lot. I would work weekends, weekend after weekend. I probably worked 25% of the weekends this year through Sunday and everything because I just knew that if I stuck it out long enough, then I was going to figure it out. And in fact, 3 hours before I did this podcast, then I went and sat down with our office. I went through all of our numbers from last year to this year, and it looks very well. We'll be able to pay off all of the expensive debt and get ourselves 100% in the green, which is a pretty good feeling. And the risk was worth the reward by 100 times. It's so worth sticking to it and never quitting. I hear Andy Frisella say, and I'm sure many of you have heard him say or someone else say something like it, the number one thing is don't quit. Don't freaking quit, no matter what it takes. You need to downsize in your house. Through all this stuff, we downsized in house by half. You need to downsize in your vehicles, whatever it takes. If you know that this is what you want to do, then don't freaking quit. And keep your head up through all of it, and you'll come out on top on the other side of it. And guess what? You might look like an ass when you're in the middle of it. You might look like and feel like that you are what everybody said you were. But at the other side of it, if you can keep your head in the right spot enough to keep you up and going every single day, get up, do something that moves your business forward every single morning. Do that first. Keep your health on the top of your list. You will get to the other side of that, and it will all be worth it. That's what I have that I want to share with you guys today. I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. I look forward to having some incredible guests this year. I do want to focus the podcast back a lot on blue-collar construction, things that we're learning in the everyday, and things that I can share with you guys that can help you be better, and lessons that I've learned the hard way that maybe you guys can learn without having to go through it yourself. So with that, this will be on YouTube. Please subscribe to the podcast. I'm trying to get enough subscribers so that I can go live on YouTube from time to time, and I don't have enough subscribers on there for that yet, so please subscribe to my podcast, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.